You're listening to Unfiltered, real talk about sex and love with Ashley
and Heather. And today we're going to be talking about recovery and relapse.
All right, we're going to just dive right in. The first question is, I'm wondering if a husband is supposed to tell his wife about relapses after full disclosure. My husband doesn't want to cause me more trauma, quotes, and says I am acting like an accountability partner. When I tell him it's to help restore trust with honesty, he says he has been honest because I've known about his struggle, but I don't know about current relapses. He is in a program and I am seeking healing. Any insights on how to have this conversation? Is he right? No, he is not right at all. So when he says, I don't want to cause you more harm, more trauma, this is really bothersome to me because I have heard this in my own marriage. And I like to say, if you don't want to cause me more trauma, then stop doing the behaviors. It's not like once the behavior has been done, not telling me about it is not a way to avoid trauma. That actually creates more trauma because now the truth is not out there and we're living in this relationship in this world where I don't really know what's going on and I don't know what behavior, what you're doing and what you're acting out is how it's impacting your behaviors. And so, I kind of hope they listen to this together because the way to not cause more trauma is to be honest, fully honest, to be working hard on your recovery and to be doing your best to avoid doing things that cause her trauma in the first place. Not telling her is more about protecting yourself than protecting her because she is needing honesty to know what's going on. And that's what she's saying she needs. And I agree. And so relapses should always be disclosed to the spouse, even before full disclosure. If you guys are in group and working, we have, and we'll put them in the show notes. We have, is it a blog, like honesty versus disclosure, where the full disclosure is about giving the full history, timelines, understanding why you do what you do, quantifying the amount of times that something happened. But you need to be using your recovery action plan and being honest with relapses because the danger, if you don't, is that you can go to your group and say, I relapsed 5 times when I was on a work trip last weekend, and you go home to your spouse. And if you're not being honest about that, then again, you're feeling like you're living a different life. You're trying to keep distance from possibly getting into that conversation. You could be feeling shame. You could be having sexual dysfunction and then just telling her, oh, it's because I'm having performance issues or having anxiety. And then you're not being honest and there's shame. There's shame on you as the addict, as the struggler, knowing that if you told her the full truth, she might not want to stay with you. And so it's really important for the betrayed spouse to have full honesty, but it's also really important for the struggler to be fully honest so that he can truly learn what it is to be living an authentic life and being the same person all around. And so relapses should absolutely be disclosed.
Mm-hmm. And this is an opportunity. Your question about, how do I have this conversation is to tell your spouse what you need, that I need for you. If there's ever a time that you could err on the side of over communicating, that's what I need from you. I need to know within a certain time frame that if relapses happen, and if you're not to the point where you've even done a full disclosure, then that's a separate deal, totally. But even once you're in recovery, when relapse happens, that it's really important that they're being disclosed right away. And in fact, for a lot of women who've been through betrayal and beyond, your safety action plan would say that I expect that you would disclose a relapse to me within 12 hours or whatever it is. And you lay all those things out that are going to be what help you to feel safe. And then if he's not willing to abide by those, then that's going to be another conversation that you have, a different conversation. But definitely is something that he should be telling you so that you can feel safe and so you can begin to rebuild trust.
And it sounds like he might need to do some more work with empathy building and learning to be empathetic and what it actually looks like to rebuild trust. Because when somebody is telling a spouse, you're being smothering, you're acting like my parent, you're acting like my accountability partner, they need to recognize that those behaviors are coming from a place of not feeling safe. And so your concern should be more about, why is my spouse not feeling safe? There must be a piece of information that I'm missing giving her in order for her to feel safe and confident in the work I'm doing. And so then when you turn it around and say you're acting like an accountability partner, when really you should be willing to do anything and everything to rebuild trust and live completely honest. Like, your life should be so honest that even if you're making mistakes, you're not afraid of exposure in any way, because you're being honest with her. And so that's a little bit twisty and manipulative to say you're acting like an accountability partner, because it's really meant to make her feel bad about her behaviors, and she should not feel bad about those behaviors. This next question is, my husband has been relapsing for 2.5 years and doesn't disclose within the agreed 24-hour period. Instead, he waits weeks or months, which leaves me feeling hopeless and angry. What boundaries should I put in place, and how long do I let him continue this pattern? Although he's in a 7 pillars group and working on recovery, his ongoing deception makes rebuilding trust difficult. I have a safety plan in place, but his lying is a major issue. I want him to find freedom, but I don't know how much more I can endure. So this is, again, very similar to our last question. And the reason why Heather and I put similar questions in is because we want these spouses and strugglers that email us to know other people have your questions and they're in a very similar situation. And so I would give the same kind of advice of saying, I need to know within, this amount of time. In this case, if he's in group and whether it's shame or fear keeping him from disclosing, or maybe selfishness because he doesn't want to lose certain freedoms or have to give up anything, I would probably schedule like some routine polygraph tests to say, I have to have this. And if I always have to end up finding out that you've relapsed, or you tell me a month later, then I need you to get to the point where you can tell me within the day, because between the time you relapse and the time I find out, there's layered confusion, anxiety. There's things going on in our marriage that I can't put my finger on, which then it just makes things too convoluted and complex. And I've had this conversation with John of saying, why are we so disconnected? Like, what is going on with us? And then him finally admitting, well, I've been relapsing. It's like, but why did I have to live for 3 weeks to 4 weeks trying to figure out what's wrong with us? It's like my energy is being wasted trying to figure out what we need in order to fix this intangible feeling in our marriage, when it's like, you could have told me that when you relapsed, and then we would have known exactly what we were dealing with. We would have put our tools in place. We would have put our plan in place, because either way, the behavior has already happened and it's already caused damage to our marriage. But now delaying putting in the action steps and being honest about it is just creating more chaos. And now we have to sift through the fact that you've lied about it on top of the fact that you did it. So now we're dealing with two major issues rather than just the one to begin with. And so um, that's really, really hard for a struggler sometimes to wrap their mind around that now we're dealing with the behavior and the lie rather than just the behavior. And lying usually is the part that the women in our groups hate the most, because they feel like they're living in like a clown house with smoke and mirrors and they don't know what's what. And that's where you feel hopeless, because life is not guaranteed to be kind to us or perfect or without, scratches and scars. But when we feel like we don't have choices, that's when it starts to feel hopeless. And if we don't know what we're working with, we don't know what our choices are. We're just trying to figure out what's going on. And so give your spouse the opportunity to have choices. This is where, if you're the one struggling, step up and own your mistakes and have the respect to give your spouse the information so that she can do what she needs to do to start rebuilding her own self-worth and identity, or whatever it is that's been broken down. If your spouse continues to not tell you and hide things, then you may distance yourself. You may say, okay, you work on your own recovery and healing. And when I start to feel and see that you are truly changed, that's when we can engage like a normal marriage. Or like I said, maybe seeing a counselor, talking about these things, maybe putting a couple polygraphs on the calendar so that when he's tempted to not tell you, he'll remember, oh yeah, I have a polygraph in 3 months. And one of the questions that's going to be asked is, in all of your relapses, did you disclose within 24 hours to your spouse? And so there's no point in like giving him some internal motivation to be able to tell right away.
Mm-hmm. Because sometimes, even if you have a safety plan in place, that you could say, okay, if this happens, then this is the consequence. And then if it happens again, then this is the consequence. And you kind of put in place a stronger consequence. But from her situation, it sounds like none of that is working. And especially if he doesn't even honor her safety plan, then it just seems like something more severe has to happen. I mean, maybe it means separation, therapeutic separation or something else, or trying counseling, or, you know what I mean? Because it just seems like a lot of the normal things that we would recommend, maybe this is at a different level and that they need some bigger form of intervention.
He may need to do some personal work that's not just about the sexual addiction, but trying to understand what in him, and this probably comes from childhood somewhere, makes him feel like it's safer to not be honest about what he's doing. And so if he's in group and doing work, then yeah, take it up a level, and he needs to get counseling as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So our last question says, are there guidelines for healthy boundaries during a separation action plan, or how do we help the kids through this? After a previous separation, I rushed back, but now, a year later, my husband violated my safety plan, requiring another separation. I'm in counseling and he's nearing the end of his 7 pillars group, but avoids personal counseling. He claims to be trying, in quotes, yet the same patterns persist, relapsing every 3 to 6 months and swapping one addiction for another. I'm not seeing real growth or accountability. And so this is really a hard thing when you get to the point where you do need a separation. I think it's interesting that she would ask, is there such a thing as a separation safety action plan? Like that you would have a safety plan just for separating, which I think is a legitimate thing. She doesn't say that this is going to be an in-house separation, so I'm presuming that it's a separation where they're going to be living in different places, but definitely having a safety action plan is warranted. Because I know that when I was separated and going through a divorce, and because I needed to be able to feel safe in my own home, that my ex-husband, that he couldn't come in my house, that he could come to the door to get the kids or whatever, but that he couldn't come in my house because I needed to feel safe. And I think even having those kind of things when it comes to a safety plan for separation totally makes sense. And then also how to help the kids through this is just being honest about what you and your husband are going through in an age appropriate way is legitimate, because kids feel the stress and the tension in the family, even if they don't know exactly what's happening. And if you don't give them an appropriate narrative, they're going to make up their own. And so we deal with a lot of adults who have struggled, but one of the things that they went through is my parents went through a divorce and nobody said anything about it. And I felt like it was my fault, even though they were, 5 years old at the time. But it was like they didn't have an appropriate narrative to understand what was actually going on. And so they made it up themselves and carried the weight of their parents' divorce all those years, thinking that it was their fault. And so just definitely making sure that you're taking care of you, and having specific things in a safety action plan that are specific to your separation, and definitely helping your kids, whatever that looks like. If your kids are to an age where they would benefit from also having some form of therapy, definitely invest in that, because you don't want to you want to just make sure they're not going to carry the weight and the shame of what you and your husband are going through, that's not going to be something they carry.
Yeah. And I was thinking, I just ended up pulling it up so I could kind of highlight it, and we'll put it in the show notes. But Vicky Tidwell has, what is it called? 7 key components of a therapeutic separation agreement. And I think there's some really helpful tips in there. And so if you go in, the 7 things to think about are length of separation, who will leave the home, access to the home, like you were talking about, Heather, communication, text, email, calls, recovery check-ins. There's a whole bunch of information here. Who's going to take care of the household? Childcare matters. What are the goals for reintegration? And then post-reintegration agreements. And so talking about that sometimes when you come back in the home, the recovery behaviors and interactions are either reduced or they just stopped happening. That, okay, we've had a therapeutic separation, but then the addict spouse is like, well, since we're not together anyways, I don't have to do all these things. And so really planning and detailing out. And then that's where you can take pieces of that and share it with the kids. Like, dad's going to pick you up on Mondays and Wednesdays and Fridays, and I'm going to pick you up on, or just like planning it out, because all of this stuff is going to be happening anyways. So being really intentional about what it's going to look like and what you need. And then in the post reintegration agreement, making sure to have a good length of time, that these behaviors, that durability piece of restoring trust is going to be there, that we're going to continue these behaviors. And it's not going to just be, okay, well, we take sex off the table or we separate, but then we're not being intentional about what we're using that for. And I think that's a big fear for people of doing some kind of separation, is that, well, what if they end up just, choosing to leave? I mean, I feel like that would be part of your answer, if they did that, but using it for good and being intentional about it. So we'll put those in the notes.
Yeah, and having a list like that is so helpful, even if you're not going to do everything on that list. But just that I know that being in a season where you're separating and not sure what else is happening, and there's been betrayal in the relationship, and your brain is just trying to think about everything all at once, sometimes it's nice to just have things laid out for you so you don't have to think about it, but you could just follow instructions. It just makes implementing these things so much easier.
And you can use a lot of these same suggestions even if you do an in-house separation, that you might, just live in separate rooms for a time being. Or if that's not an option, you might have just like an emotional type separation where maybe you are in the same room, but you can go through this list of, we are, as our relationship is known now, we are going to take a break from that version of it, and we're going to do this version to try to heal, get some space, and reintegrate. So just make sure you have a plan, that there's a plan and you feel good about it and it's understood, and it even suggests that it's written down, signed, and dated, that this is something you guys are going to agree to.
Mm-hmm. And that you have support and safe community around you through this process.
These were really important topics that we discussed today, and I'm so glad that people feel safe enough to ask us these questions, that we can use our experience, the pain we've had, and some of the experiences from the women who have gone through our groups to be able to leverage that and help people not have to go through some of the things that we did, and being able to pass that knowledge and healing forward. We just really appreciate you guys being here and joining the conversation and sending us your questions. As we say, if you can think about it, we should be talking about it. So continue giving us your questions. Send them to unfiltered@puredesire.org. And if you found this episode helpful, make sure to share it with a friend.